Welcome into another edition of the Prep Extra podcast. I'm Colton Stone alongside Chris Basnett. We're going to recap the previous week of prep football, look ahead, hit on some city games, hit on some notable games from the area, the state. Another good week of football, but another week where we said these teams are just as good as we thought they were. And, not too many surprises really from last week.
Yeah, not a lot of movement in the top 10 this week. You and I were talking about that before we got started here, and one new team in a couple different classes, maybe two new teams in a class here and there. But yeah, by and large, I think teams have kind of settled in. We kind of know where the power is in a lot of these classes, like we've talked about before, and a couple surprises here and there. We'll give a shout out to Oakland Craig beating number 3 Hartington Cedar Catholic in C2, probably the big upset, if you want to call it that, sure, of the week. Lincoln Lutheran beating Wilbur Claytonia by 3 touchdowns. But other than that, nothing really surprises you. Bennington and Elkhorn were in a close game until I think Bennington was scoreless till the last 3.5 minutes of the first half. And they scored 2 touchdowns in 3 minutes, and they win by 20. And that's been their closest game of the year. So again, Elkhorn's 3-2. Played Bennington as tough as anybody has all year. That probably tells you where Bennington's at in that class. Class A, kind of the same thing. West Side rolls, Gretna rolls. Kearney won by a couple scores. They have a big one with Grand Island this week. Aurora, again, same thing. C1 Aurora, Pierce McCook roll. And you can go right on down the list and say that about the top of every class. So yeah, it's a deal where there's not a lot of movement in the top 10. But now this week, I think you're seeing, after a couple slower weeks in our coverage area as far as big-time matchups, there's a lot more fun matchups this week than we've had, in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. Bennington is one of those that, I jokingly say, like, at some point they've got to lose one of these games, right? But they haven't. They find a way that I don't know if it's second half adjustments or they just wear the other team down eventually. They come out in the second half and it's like, this was not the team that played in the first half. Yeah. So, and you can kind of say that. You can say that about West Side. They had a little bit of struggle with Millard North, and then they've kind of just rolled.
Same thing with Bellevue West. They were trailing Bellevue West and Millard North both at halftime, yeah. And then against Bellevue West scored 3 touchdowns in about a minute, in the second half in his ball game. So, yeah, it's a deal where that's what good teams do, right? You make adjustments as the game gets going. And if you're a good team, you execute those adjustments, and they make the difference. That's just what you're seeing, I think, is quality teams making adjustments.
Yeah, this past week, Southeast kind of making a climb back up. Had a rocky start to the season, 0-2, if I remember correctly. Haven't lost since. An interesting game with Millard North, because you'd look at the box score, throw the actual physical score out, and you'd say how, Millard North clearly hung in this game and it probably won this game. But then you look at the score and you're like, wait, 3 scores. You look at a team that had over 500 rushing yards, and Southeast still put 56 on them and only gave up 35. You were there. That's, again, high scoring, but both offenses looked great, and still somehow Southeast came out and defensively played well enough to win.
Southeast kind of showed its experience. Millard North's playing a lot of young guys. And it was 35-7 at halftime. Southeast had the lead, and it was like that because Millard North had a couple turnovers that Southeast turned into touchdowns. They put the ball on the ground a couple times and things like that, and Southeast took advantage. That's the most points Southeast has scored in a game in at least 20 years. Going back and looking through online records as far back as we can, that's the most they've had in a couple decades. And so they built that cushion. Did they relax a little in the second half? Maybe. But Millard North was moving the ball on them in the first half. They just put the ball on the ground, and Southeast got on top of it and took advantage of it. And that's a sign of a team that's playing well. You mentioned the 0-2 start, and they played pretty well against Elkhorn South. Elkhorn South just won the game. They were a little better that day. That happens. They didn't play very well the next week against Lincoln East. Blew a 14-0 lead. And now all of a sudden, a team that you're thinking, and that they're thinking, I'm sure, is that they could have been 2-0 pretty easily. Now they're 0-2, and you kind of start going, oh boy, this season could go sideways. But we've seen them rally, and we've seen them win 3 in a row, and that's what you kind of come to expect from an established program, from an experienced program like Lincoln Southeast is, and it really sets up a fun game this week with Lincoln Southwest, who's 4-1, and has also spent time in the top 10 this year. Lost to Papillion La Vista, who at the time was winless. Probably stinging a little bit from that one too. So it's a really, really interesting game Friday night. That's the 8 p.m. special out at Seacrest Field, so we're going to get some Lincoln football after dark out there. But yeah, two interesting teams, two interesting stories, and a big game as far as bragging rights in the city.
Yeah, bounce back win last week for Lincoln High. A couple of bounce back wins actually. Lincoln Lutheran again also had kind of a rocky start to the season. Big win against Waverly, like you said. Pius bounces back after a loss to bounce back from a loss to Bennington.
Yeah, that's a lot of teams doing that.
Yeah, exactly. So they get a big win over Crete. Anything from last week from those teams that maybe have been a little shaky, but that have kind of maybe found some footing now that we're midway through the season? Anything that kind of jumps out to you with those teams?
Well, I think you kind of touched on it. Lincoln Lutheran, kind of the same boat as Southeast. They started 0-2, and you talked to them before the season. They had really high expectations. They had a big senior group back, really great athlete at quarterback in Garrett Hofs, and all of a sudden they're 0-2. And at the time, we didn't know how good Wahoo Newman was. They've turned out to be pretty good. So you lose the first week, the sword game to Lincoln Christian by a touchdown. That's a tough way to start. Yeah. And again, it's a season that could have gone sideways, but they've rallied. They scored in the last 20 seconds to beat Aquinas in week 3. Got a little better week 4. This week they're tied at halftime with Wilbur-Claytonia, and they score 35 unanswered in the second half. So a team that's kind of righted the ship, and again, it's experience, right? It's experience that kind of gets everybody on the same page. Kind of you flush those losses and you move on. I think that's what you're seeing with a team like Lincoln Lutheran. Pius, the schedule has just been such a bear for them. Scotts Bluff in that game at halftime, Bennington in that game at halftime. And you look at the record. And you go, well, the record isn't great. They've been in those games, at least for a half. And the question, as we've talked about before, is can they sustain that for 4 quarters? They're able to do it a little bit more against Crete, who isn't quite at the level that a Bennington or a Scotts Bluff is. But that's what you have to do in those games, is take care of business. So now the reward for that for Pius is go on the road and play Omaha Sky. Yep. So you're right back into it in Class B. So credit to Pius, I think, for staying with it in a pretty tough schedule. And we talk about Class B, and there's maybe not a ton of depth there, but those top 4 or 5 teams are really, really good. And if you're playing a combination of those teams, it's going to be tough sledding. It just is. And that's what Pius has run into. So credit to Pius, I think, for really sticking with it, getting through that tough part of the schedule, playing pretty well for the most part, and you get rewarded for it last week, and now you have a chance to go on the road and win one of these ranked games. And that could really springboard them going forward.
Yeah, sticking in Class B, you were at the York-Waverly game. Waverly wins 35-7. I extensively covered Waverly back in 2020, and this team is very similar to that team where, they'll score a lot of points, but not because they dazzle you on offense. It's because their defense suffocates you, that they just get the ball. They have the ball more than you have the ball. Yeah. Reed Manstead's done a great job at Waverly. It keeps the defense. They've had some, in these past 2 years, they've had some changes on that offense, but it seems like no matter what, they put 11 guys out on the defensive side of the ball, and they will control the pace of the game.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I asked Manstead after the game, I said, who are some of the guys that lead you on that defense? And he proceeded to list 12 guys. And you may not know this, but you only have 11 guys on the field at a time when you play football at the Class B level. So, and he talked about that. They only had 2 or 3 guys returning from that defense, but they love their linebackers. Their linebackers were so impressive. They just flow to the ball. And there was more than one time Friday night where there was maybe a little bit of a crease for a York ball carrier, and all of a sudden he gets cut down by a linebacker flying in there. I don't know how many times that happens. And it's not like York isn't well coached. Glenn Snodgrass has won state titles at 8-man. He's won state titles in 11-man. He won a state title at York. They want to run the ball at you, and York couldn't do it. They couldn't run the ball at Waverly despite having a pretty good size advantage up front. They just could not solve those linebackers at the second level. Now you've got to throw the ball, and you don't want to be doing that against a Waverly defense and falling behind. And that was the other quote that kind of struck me when Reed Manstead said, it's a 7-0 game at halftime. Waverly's got the lead, and they get a 3-and-out punt, go down and score 14-0. At that point, you're going, oh boy, I don't know if York's going to get back in this. And that's basically what Reed Manstead said. He said we thought if we get it to 2 scores, we'd feel pretty good. And you just don't hear that a lot in this day and age, where you see so many shootouts. You see 56-35 or whatever it may be. And Waverly's whole deal is, if we can get it to 2 scores, our defense is good enough to win the game. And it has been pretty much every game this year. There may be a bad special teams play away from Elkhorn against Elkhorn from being unbeaten, and that's what it comes down to. So another tough test for Waverly this week. Scotts Bluff's making the trip back east again. They came out here for Pius week 1. Another big team that wants to move the ball on the ground, keep it on the ground if they can. I think it's a really fascinating matchup. And Scotts Bluff's kind of teetered these last couple weeks. Gretna Northwest blocked a punt late, had the ball deep in Scotts Bluff territory Friday night. Bearcats had to get a stop. They got it, and the week before it was another close game for Scotts Bluff. So is Friday night the night that Waverly jumps up and beats one of those top teams and makes moves? Sure could be. It sure looks like it from what I saw Friday night. That defense will keep them in a game with anybody. They don't play Bennington this year, at least in the regular season. I'd love to see them meet in the playoffs. I just don't. I think Waverly's defense would give them a chance in that game against a team that really wants to overwhelm you with offense, like Bennington does. Not that Bennington can't play defense, but they want to beat you with what they have on offense. Waverly wants to beat you with what they have on defense. So, yeah, you're right. I've covered Waverly once or twice in the past few years, and that identity hasn't changed. We're going to have the ball more than you. We're going to stop you, and we're going to play field position, and we're going to wait for you to make a mistake against our defense. And it's a pretty good formula. It's worked so far.
Yeah, I draw the comparison to 2020. They went 8-1 in the regular season. Only loss is a misty game at Elkhorn that I think they lost by 3 maybe. So it's a team that, again, yeah, if they can control the game with their defense, it could get scary for you down the stretch. One more game from last week, and then we can kind of look ahead at a few more this week. Parkview Christian seems like they're kind of back to, level ground, starting to rise again. Big win against Sterling. We joked that that's our proverbial city favorite to win a state title, but seems like they're kind of rounding into form now here through the middle of the season.
Yeah, had the tough game against SEM where they had an injury to a key guy in a game. They led 16-0 and ended up losing 20-16. So you feel pretty good, I think, right now if you're Parkview Christian. They've kind of settled in. They know it's another team with a lot of guys back from last year, a lot of seniors leadership, a lot of guys that have played football together. They get Pawnee City this week, number 8 in 6-man. And 6-man's so funny because, you might lose a game 60-30, and you may not have played that bad. It's just the way the game goes sometimes. And we know what we've talked about this all the time, the top of the class, and Potter Dix is averaging almost 80 points a game, which is ridiculous, and they're the pretty clear favorite. But yeah, I think Parkview Christian's kind of right where they maybe expected to be. Of course, you think you might beat SEM in that game a couple weeks ago. You don't. You still feel pretty good. They've gotten a little better every week. The offense has gotten a little better. The defense has stayed pretty steady, which if you can play a little defense in 6-man, you're going to be all right. So I think the Patriots are really happy with where they're at right now. And this game on Friday kind of gives them a chance to say, hey, we haven't gone anywhere, and we're going to be right in this thing at the end of the season.
Yeah. Moving on to this week, again, it seems like we're just flying through the season at this point. Week 6 already. We've touched on a few of them. Pius, Scott. Can Pius maybe, control in the first half and maybe carry that in the second half? I don't know.
Yeah. This Scott team isn't like the vintage Scott teams.
True.
And that's maybe the thing where that can help Pius. Because like we said, they've been in the game with Scotts Bluff. They've been in the game with Bennington into halftime. It's the second half where these teams have kind of pulled away. Pius has to find a way to get this game, I think, to the fourth quarter. And whether you're within a score or you're ahead, if you do that, now all of a sudden you get a little belief on that sideline where it's not, oh boy, here we go again. We were in it for a half, and now we're trailing. So I think that's the key for the Bolts. Can they get that thing, A, to halftime, B, into the third quarter, C, into the fourth quarter? If they do that, they got a really good chance to win that game. They're good enough defensively to do it. And so a game where you've kind of run the gauntlet, if you're Pius, Scott maybe isn't what it has been in past years. Still a pretty nice win if you can go on the road and get that one.
Thursday as well, Lincoln East at Millard South. Millard South, a big win over North Star. East, big win over Columbus. I'm not really sure what to expect from this game, but it's intriguing in the sense of I know what these two teams have been before. What are they now? Yeah. And it kind of is a measuring stick for both programs of where they're at this season.
Yeah, and it's, of course, the star power in this game. We all know Malachi Coleman for Lincoln East, who's really started to come on the past couple weeks and play some really good football. They've got the quarterback situation settled with Jeter Worley. using his arm and his legs to move that offense. So I think you feel pretty good there. Millard South's an interesting story. Lost their quarterback for 3 weeks because he was down playing with the U18 baseball team. He's a Vanderbilt commit. They got him back last week against North Star. There you go, Gators. Deal with that right on.
Exactly.
And they score 49. So, yeah, they had a 3-game losing streak. They also had it without their best player. Certainly one of their most important players at quarterback. So you've got those guys back. The star power is going to be there. For East, it's going to be, can the defense keep them in it? I don't know that East can win a shootout in this game. I don't know if they have enough offensively to stay with Millard South. And it's kind of like every time a Lincoln school goes into the Metro. Can they match up athletically? Can they get the game into the second half? And can you limit the mistakes? We saw Southwest go into the Metro and lose to Papillion La Vista a couple weeks ago by a couple touchdowns because they couldn't get their offense going.
Right.
This is the other way around. I think there's going to be plenty of offense both ways in this one. It's can East limit the mistakes, limit Millard South's opportunities, and give themselves a chance to again get that game into the second half and have a chance.
Yeah, and then of course the game we're talking about in the city, Southeast, Southwest. Boy, this is setting up to be a good one. Yeah. What are a couple of keys for truthfully either team to win this game? I think they're pretty evenly matched to an extent, but there has to be one winner at the end of the day, and there has to be something that gives on one side.
Yeah, I think, I have Southeast number 10 this week. It very easily could have been Southwest. I think you can kind of pick whichever one you want, and it's fine. Southeast is playing really good football right now, 3 in a row. They've won after the 0-2 start. Southwest is 4-1, had the tough loss last week, rebounded this week. And I think it's a game where the battle up front is going to decide it, and that was a deal where Southwest had to replace all 5 of their offensive linemen. They had to replace 2 of their 3 defensive linemen from last year. Those guys, for the most part, have done a pretty good job. Now, on the other side of that, Southeast has a lot of experience back. Obviously, Gunnar Gatula is the guy everybody knows on that offensive line, but they've really settled into a nice rhythm with their running game. That was something Ryan Gatula talked about after their game the other night. They've really kind of found something there with a couple different guys running the ball. Max Butenbach, his younger brother Cash, have kind of taken over those running back duties. And then they're getting enough I shouldn't say enough, they're getting a lot out of the passing game from Owen Baxter, who's just been really efficient. I think he was 6 for 7 or 7 for 8 against Millard North the other night. So they can move the chains on you. They're not going to necessarily hit you with an 80-yard touchdown, but they can move the chains, and they can get it in 15, 20-yard chunks if they need to. So this could be a big play type game. Southwest has a 3-year starter at quarterback in Colin Fritton. Really great experience on the outside at receiver. They're great at running back. They've got the skill guys to, I think, make this a really interesting game. And I'm sure they're putting on the film from that Millard North Southeast game and going, well, if Millard North can do that, what are we going to do? Yeah. That's a team that moved the ball with sophomores and juniors, and we're going to put seniors out there. So I go back and forth on this one. I don't know where it goes. I think you maybe lean slightly to Southeast side just because of that experience up front. They've maybe got just a little bit more there. But again, I think it's 2 evenly matched teams. It's the 8 o'clock game at Seacrest. You're going to have all day to get amped up for it. I think it should be 2 good fan bases up there. It should be a fun atmosphere on a Friday. It's not the Thursday night game, where it's kind of, we kind of want to be there, but not really. Yeah. And there's still school tomorrow. No, this is a Friday night, 8 o'clock. Bragging rights in the city type game, probably the game of the year in the city, at least in the regular season. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think you can flip a coin and then probably not go wrong either way with who you wanted in that one.
Yeah, we'll hold off on our score predictions or winning predictions. I do really think this game could go either way. Yeah. There are a few more big games, especially in Class A, one in Class B, Bennington-Blair. That may be Bennington's last real test. It's a road test. But you look at Class A, you've got Bell West at Gretna, number 5 at number 2, and you've got Grand Island at Kearney. Kearney, another chance to prove that they belong to be one of those top 5 teams. Yeah,
bumped them up to number 3 last week, and they got North Platte last week, Grand Island this week. Probably their 2 biggest rivals. Grand Island, obviously the big one. And if you're familiar with that area, that part of the state, you know what that rivalry is. And it's like that across every sport out there. I covered Kearney for a lot of years when I lived in Kearney, and there's nothing quite like Kearney Grand Island, and so weird things happen in that game. There's been years when Kearney's been down and beat Grand Island. There's been years when Grand Island's been down and beat Kearney. This year, they're both pretty good. You got 2 top 10 teams. Kearney's the surprise of Class A. I don't think there's any question about that with the way they've started the season. Brandon Kuhl's one of the best coaches in the state. Grand Island, it's not flashy. It's not always pretty, but they play defense and they make you work, and they're physical in the run game. I think it's a really, really fun matchup. And again, it's a game where it's tough to, you look at the rankings and you say, oh, Kearney should win that game. You can't do that in this game because funky stuff always seems to happen. It would not shock me to see Grand Island win this game. It would not shock me to see Kearney win this game by a couple touchdowns. I think everything's on the table with that game. And like you said, it's a deal where Kearney's got a chance to prove itself again against a ranked opponent. They've done it against Bellevue West on the road. Now you're doing it at home. And you had so many road games to start the season. Now you've got your second row in Kearney where you don't have to get on a bus and drive 2 or 3 hours and play on a Thursday night even, which is what they were doing. So, yeah, if you're Kearney, that's a golden opportunity to say, hey, you know what, this is legit, and we've got something here.
Any lean in Bell West Gretna? I think Bell West has just kind of gotten the raw end of the deal in a couple of games, but Gretna seems to, much like West Side, Gretna kind of just seems like they're going to potentially cruise their way right to maybe another state title.
Yeah, it's a game, probably the shootout of the year. I mean, I think everybody's expecting that. Now we said it's going to be 17-14 or something like that. But
11-10, right?
Yeah. Let's hope not.
Yeah.
Man alive. 2 great quarterbacks, obviously, in Zane Flores and Danny Kalin, probably the 2 best quarterbacks in the state. 2 teams that we know can score. Gretna probably a little better defensively than Bellevue West if you're just looking at scores and things like that. It feels like it's been kind of a quiet year for Gretna. They've won so easily, it feels like. And you look at the score, you go, man, they won by 3 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns. Man, they made that look easy. It's been a little tougher for Bellevue West. And they played a tough schedule, close things. They have an extra point blocked against Kearney, then Kearney throws a 70-yard touchdown pass or whatever it was to win the game. Stuff like that. So Bellevue West has 2 losses. It's not like they got blown out, in those games. The other loss was to West Side, which, again, a game they led at halftime. So that's going to be really fun. I guess if you're going to lean one way, you maybe lean Gretna because the defense is a little better. And with an Oklahoma State committed the controls against Bellevue West defense, it's given up some points. Logic kind of leads you towards the direction of the Dragons. But, yeah, if they win that game handily, make it look easy. Boy, you hate to do it, but you can kind of start to see the path where it might be a state championship rematch here in a month and a half.
Absolutely. It kind of seems like we are on a crash course for Westside Gretna again if everything holds chalk, essentially. But for Chris Basnett, I'm Colton Stone. It's been another episode of the Prep Extra podcast. We will talk to you guys next week.